From the labyrinth of loops to the variable valley, we'll see the cliffs of value first. JavaScript's right up your alley. Built-ins, bluff, file spas, array, archipelago. Declarations in a desert where you'll find out how far you'll go. Learn to program, take a ride, buy a ticket, step inside. All aboard, you're at the station to increase your education. Bon voyage, skinny dip! As long as functions you don't skip on this, the JavaScript road trip.
So those are some of the functions that JavaScript has built in directly for you, but what happens when you want to build your own functionality? That's the glory of computer programming, right? We want to build what we want. So in this level, we're going to teach you how to build your own function declarations in this, level 4, the desert of declarations. First of all, what's a function for? Well, if we give a function some input, it will do some work on that input, some stuff to it, and then it will output something on the back end of the function as a result. A function will solve problems for developers. It will do something step by step that we need to do repeatedly. Here, let's take a look at a basic function that's going to sum together two cubes. We'll call it the sum of two cubes. The first step would be to get two numbers. So let's say we had 4 and we had 9. Then we would cube each number as the next step. So 4 cubed would be 64, and 9 cubed would be 729. The third step in our function would actually be to sum the cubes together. So we would get 64 plus 729, and that will give us 793. The last step, which is of course important, is to return the answer from the function. So we get 793 as the output of our function. So what are these steps if we were to write code for them? Let's see some syntax for finding the sum of our cubes. Well, the first step of getting 4, we would establish a variable, let's call it a, and set it equal to 4. Then we would do the same thing for 9, but we would establish the variable as b. Then when we want to start cubing the values, we'll start with 4 cubed equals 64. We'll establish a variable called a cubed and set that equal to a times a times a. Then we'll do the same thing for b cubed. Ultimately, we'll make a variable called sum and add a cubed and b cubed together. So ultimately, at the end of our coded function, we would have 793 as the output. Now the cool thing about functions is that they are very reusable, and that makes them very useful. We can wrap our code in a function that will allow us to reuse it frequently. Here you can see when we put 4 and 9 into the function, we'll get 793 as the output, but when we put 5 and 6 into the same function, we get 341. Now let's look carefully at how to build a function with syntax in JavaScript code. We'll start our function with the actual keyword function. We'll also need 2 braces that enclose the entire function into a code block. Next, we need to title the function. We'll call ours sum of cubes. And then we need a set of parameters that are enclosed in parentheses. Here, because we have 2 inputs to our function, we have 2 parameters, a and b. But you can have just as many parameters as you want in any declared function. You can think of these parameters, which are just basically our inputs to the function, as the materials that the function either uses or does work on to produce the output you're looking for. Inside the braces, of course, the function will actually do some stuff. That's what we want the function to do. And then at the end of the function, we'll return something or even nothing from the process. That return keyword tells the function, okay, you're done. Go ahead and exit and give us whatever follows the return keyword. An important thing to note about the return keyword is that you'll often see it anywhere inside the function because it can be used to instantly exit at any time. Here, however, we want it at the end of our sum of cubes function. So now let's actually build out our sum of cubes function. Remember our 4 steps that we made? Let's see where they fall inside the syntax of our function. If we were to get 2 numbers as our first step, those are the parameters, which get passed into the function when it is called. The second step would be to cube each number, so that's going to be a process we do inside the function body. Then we will sum the cubes. That's another step we'll do in the function body. And at the end, we'll return that sum. And that's our final step of returning the answer. So now let's transfer in the actual syntax into those steps. Well, our parameters don't change. They'll still be a and b. Once the parameters are actually passed into the function, they can be used at any point in the function's process. Then, of course, our next step will be cubing a, which you can see a cubed equals a times a, followed by cubing b with the same procedure, and then a sum, where we add a cubed and b cubed together, and then we will return that sum value from the function. Now that we have built our super cool sum of cubes function, we can call it by using the function's name followed by a set of parentheses within which we place the parameters for our function. Here, when we place our 4 and our 9 into the sum of cubes function, we get a 793 instantly returned. Now we can do a lot of things with our sum of cubes function. We could use it in an assignment expression. So if we wanted to make a variable, let's call it mySum, and then we call sum of cubes, let's say on 5 and 6, and then tried to alert our mySum variable after that calculation to the screen, we would get 341 alerted to our user. Now that we know how to build a function, let's see if we can also put in a little bit of efficiency into our functions. Because being concise helps us with memory and storage operations. Our function works great, but we've made 3 unnecessary variables that all have to be allocated in memory. Let's see if there's a way to get rid of those. Well, first of all, we've made a sum variable that's a cubed plus b cubed. Why don't we just return a cubed plus b cubed? The return keyword will evaluate that expression and return it. Now we don't need a sum variable anymore. Well, if that's true, we don't need a b cubed variable. We can just put b times b times b in place of b cubed. And you can probably see where that's going. Because if we don't need a b cubed variable, then we don't need an a cubed variable either. And we can just write a times a times a. So now we've got one statement that says return a times a times a plus b times b times b, which is what we wanted to do in the first place. Now we've eliminated 3 different variables and simplified our function. Now, as you saw before, we can call our sum of cubes function with 2 numbers passed in as parameters, but we can also pass in expressions as parameters. JavaScript will go ahead and evaluate and simplify those expressions before calling the actual function. So you can see here that if we called the sum of cubes with 2 expressions as parameters, 1 plus 2 and 3 plus 5, that would be the exact same thing as calling sum of cubes on 3 and 8. And of course, we would get a 539 as the output. We can also use variables as parameters. Here you can see we've established a variable called x that we've set to 3, and then we've used x inside the parameters in a sum of cubes call. So this particular call of sum of cubes would be the same as sum of cubes 6 and 12, because x is 3. And so we would get an output of 1,494.